Welcome to the next episode of the PLM Global Green Alliance, talking with PLM vendors about their sustainability targets, their products, and also, most important, what they experience from their customers in the field. Today we are talking again with Dave Duncan and James Norman. We talked with them in December 2022, and we are curious about what has been happening in the past 1.5 years. And more impressive even, Dave, we saw your tour through Europe. We want to learn what you've seen over there. So maybe, Dave, James, let's start with a quick introduction of both of you, and then we jump into the tour.
Yeah, sounds good. So Dave Duncan, lead sustainability at PTC. Been with PTC since the Servigistics acquisition in 2012. Spent most of my time in product management. With sustainability, I spent about 20% of my time on corporate sustainability, cleaning up PTC's footprint, but still 80% in a product management capacity for sustainability offerings to our customers.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm James Norman. I lead our Global Center of Excellence for PLM. Been with PTC about 16 years. Came to PTC by way of a sustainability acquisition and have remained kind of on and off as sustainability has come in and out of vogue. One of the main SMEs in PTC for sustainability, and in my role for the PLM Center of Excellence, I'm helping start to scale some of that expertise to some of our PLM field individuals so that they can handle those conversations with customers in the context of PLM and the digital thread.
Okay. Yeah, and James, I remember you were one of the early, I would say, advocates of also sustainability measurements and data searches. If I remember well, it was 2008 in our previous interview.
Yeah, we started, it was called Planet Metrics. It was back in 2007, 2008. So maybe a decade or two too early, but
yeah. Time is flying.
Yeah, it is for sure.
Okay. But then, Dave, what made you decide to go for 3 months to Europe?
Yeah, I mean, Europe is really driving global regulation for sustainability. As we know, the CSRD, and the Americans realize it, so the Japanese, Chinese, Koreans, anyone else who's a large industrial economy. So given that CSRD is ramping up quickly with some of the first accounts needing to report as early as next year, it made sense to get out there to, one, educate our field in terms of what our sustainability offerings are, but more importantly, to visit with our customers. And we talked to over 200 manufacturers while we're out there so that we completely understand what they need. There's alignment on what we offer, and it validates our roadmaps together.
Okay. And 3 months? Why not 1 month, 1 week?
Yeah. The reason being is we wanted to have deeper discussions. We didn't want to just have auditorium pitches where we get 100, 200 customers at a time together and they hear something, and maybe we have a couple of discussions and then they leave. We wanted to deeply immerse ourselves. And secondly, it's easier to, I would say, get discussions and deeper discussions when we go to the locations of where the manufacturers are. So we went to 21 locations over 11 weeks, and therefore we're able to have the right discussions with the right people so that we understood the markets and the needs.
Right. I think you really lived the Europe sustainability, I would say, trends.
Yeah.
And I know from talking with my American colleagues in the Green Alliance, the Americans, and I generalize, of course, are much more about greenhouse gas emissions, etc., where in the European Green Deal, it's all about the whole big picture, which is also materials, circular economy, etc.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you're right. And particularly in the American media, it's mostly about climate change. But I think fortunately with the manufacturers here, it's hazardous material controls, decarbonization. They also look into circularity pretty heavily too, because that's also a main driver of decarbonization.
So zooming in on your experience, and you mentioned already circularity. Is there? Do you see a move towards circularity in your customer base or in your implementation base, that companies are changing their traditional ways of producing products?
We do. I think there's some lead customers that are practicing it now. A lot of others are considering it for a second phase. For companies that are following the regulation in terms of they're moving at the pace that the regulation requires them to, they're looking at more cradle to gate for now. For like the 2026 and 2027 mandates, it's more around what's your environmental product declaration to understand what your footprint is when your product leaves the factory. And then subsequent to that would be digital product passports, which mandate circularity. But fortunately, many verticals like automotive and power gen and heavy equipment have had success with circularity for years. With their configure to order or modular designs, they've created both the supply as well as the demand for remanufactured parts. And that's been successful for them. And now we're starting to see some other verticals mimic that. Like, for example, when we're in Lyon, we were speaking with a mining manufacturer. They make drills, and they are able to remanufacture a drill with a like new warranty with 80% less footprint than a new drill, less expense for their customers for the product, and more margin for themselves. So it works out for everybody. So their customers effectively say, hey, if you have a remanufactured drill available, I'd rather have that than a new one. And they say, yeah, we would too. And part of what they're doing or where they're progressing is when they remanufacture a drill, their customers are in Australia, South Africa, South America, Alaska, and to bring that heavy equipment back to Lyon, remanufacture it, and then ship it back to the customer, cuts into a lot of that cost and footprint advantage. So because with digital sophistication, they're able to have more, I would say, distributed remanufacturing, and they put the remanufacturing closer to where that heavy equipment exists and where it circulates.
Okay. I think this is a very good example that investing in sustainability and circular economy has a positive business outcome. Are companies willing to share this type of stories?
They generally are, surprisingly. And it's I've seen very few companies that hold on to their sustainability breakthroughs as intellectual property. There seems to be much more appetite to share and to gain that recognition of their brand as a leader in some of the techniques and successes in sustainability. So it's been, I would say, extremely collaborative, and we saw that during the workshops where manufacturers, even in similar verticals, were talking openly with each other.
And if you look back on the 3 months, what would you say are the major highlights that you learned from Europe?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think there's several. I think one is if we look at academia, academia says you should progress from component level sustainability to product level sustainability to a product service system level sustainability. And I think a finding in that is it's more practical to start in the middle for an existing manufacturer, in that job one is to really understand what the hotspots are of your existing portfolio. And the best way to do that is to roll up footprint information up through your bills of materials, so you understand of your 100 products and 1,000 parts per product, what are the hottest areas that you want to invest for improvement in, either as a change request or focus for new generations of product. Whereas if you just start at the component level, you're really guessing as far as where you're going to start. And some of these hotspots are not necessarily that intuitive. So I think there's a strong appeal and a strong push from manufacturers to gain a quick, even with limited precision, understanding of where their portfolio exists today so that they can concentrate on the right initial 10% of the problem. So I think that's one. Another is the understanding of where these hotspots are and what is most actionable. I think that, and during these sessions, some customers were fairly far along and understood sustainability. Others didn't necessarily. And I think a big big discovery anyway for many manufacturers was, wow, it's my upstream footprint that is typically the majority of the footprint that I need to solve for as a life cycle practitioner. For a typical manufacturer, between 75 and 90% of the footprint is in the materials and components that come to the receiving dock of the factory. And the factory is only between 1 and 10% typically of the footprint. But intuitively, you see the factory as this high energy building with smokestacks, and wow, that must be where I need to focus my attention. But it's for a discrete manufacturer that does mostly assembly, a little bit of transformation to make parts. It's that upstream that is deserves vastly more attention to resolve.
Right, you make an interesting point here. Most manufacturers now, especially the OEMs in the end, are assembling.
Yeah.
And not making the parts and the products anymore. So all the things are done by suppliers. And James, jump in if you have experiences similar on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to piggyback off of what Dave said with the component versus product service system is that, at the component level, you only have so many levers to pull. And similarly to the point you just made about OEMs, if they don't know their supply chain and they don't understand what's happening at the product system level, they have almost no levers to pull. Because there's also only so many things that you can do, especially with highly engineered products, to drive improvements just by switching materials. Things like lightweighting and things for designing for more end of life that get beyond the gate certainly help. But if you're trying to address that upstream problem, it's all supply chain. And it's, looking at examples like Microsoft and others that have really gone deep in trying to affect how their suppliers are doing manufacturing is what's really going to move the needle. And to the point of transparency, it's in their best interest to be more transparent. It sets an example for their supply chain and also helps them with their competitors who have similar suppliers or the same suppliers that don't want to give up information to be a little bit more willing to share. So yeah, if you just start at those component level identification hotspots, it's not going to drive effective strategies for moving the needle on sustainability anywhere along that value chain. It's got to be more of a systematic view of things. So it's good to see that Europe is both moving in that direction legislatively and that culturally it's started to shift in that way. I think we're still playing a little bit of catch up here in the US.
I think I hear here two interesting things. It's about the system thinking, about sure. Not anymore on the component level. And from the other hand, we had interviews with SAP, and they say we measure what happens in the plant. We can measure the materials, so we understand what is happening with the products. However, we don't design them. And 80% of the design is, in general, people say is responsible for the environmental impact.
Yeah, it really depends on the product. Sometimes you can really impact a lot of what's designed into it based on how you choose materials. In other cases, looking at things like modularity and end of life are going to be significantly more impactful than anything you can do in terms of what you might think about in terms of material or supplier selection. So without that broader systematic view of the product as a product service system, you miss the potential levers that you can pull to have real big impact. And sometimes can make decisions that actually, to Dave's point, like circularity in and of itself is not necessarily a good thing, right? Like if you have to ship really heavy things, tens of thousands of miles back and have them remanufactured in areas with dirty manufacturing, you might be better off, decentralizing your manufacturing and just making new things. But you wouldn't know that unless you took more of a systematic whole system view of the product as that kind of product system. So yeah, I think it's a very important point. It makes the problem a lot harder to tackle and necessitates, some of the things that the PLM Green Alliance is really interested in with connected systems and all the things that I'm sure we'll get into later in the interview. But it's a bigger problem to solve, but it's one that I think is, yeah, it's crucial and fundamental. And you see that in the legislation coming out of Europe, a recognition that if you don't start from that place, you're going to miss and potentially undermine the whole point of trying to drive sustainability in the first place.
Yeah, we were pleasantly surprised as well, even a little bit further downstream, with the interest from manufacturers in discussing modularity and product service systems. There's a spike in the amount of engineering leaders that now also have responsibility for service margins of their products. So they really need to understand, okay, how does this work? How do I need to design differently? What sort of modular design do I need, not only for service, but also the disassembly and take back of the used parts and used products so that I can refurbish and remanufacture them profitably? And that's, those types of responsibilities and accountability are pervasive throughout the verticals now.
Yeah. I had these discussions on serviceability of products. Of course, if you are in mass products that needs to be serviceable, then it's part of your design process, and then you have to think about it. But probably, yeah, if you are in Europe with the industrial equipment manufacturers, they often have to bring a machine with the best and latest technology, and R&D is not really into the mindset of how to service it. That will come later. And,
yeah.
Did you see that happen? Do you see a change there?
We do. We see new emphasis in that. And there's also the dark shadow of the digital product passport flying overhead. That's coming in 2027 for battery manufacturers as well, and then other verticals subsequent to that. So these manufacturers understand that very soon, towards the end of the decade, that they will have legal accountability for the return of the materials and the products that they sell to their customers. And they can take back that material and parts and product in one of two ways. One, as a cost, or two, as a profit center. And of course, they want to bring it back as a profit center. And in order to do that, they need to have good commercial use for those parts and products when they come back, which of course involves modular design and design intent up front to do that. So I think that's what's driving a lot of this fuller life cycle responsibility in the engineering teams.
And this requires a change in methodology, in ways of working.
Yeah.
Is PTC also active in that area, in publishing new best practices or guiding those practices?
We are, and we think a good vehicle to communicate that is through like requirements templates, items like that. Of course, services offerings are super important there. But as far as giving rules of thumb early on in design, as far as designing for modularity, designing for disassembly, designing for sustainable behavior, et cetera, those are things that we are looking at towards requirements templates that we can provide in products so that the folks that are making the decisions on the specific designs have those. But there's an enormous enterprise change management and other aspects that are necessary. That there are some, I think, specific focused services providers that specialize in that. Also, the global system integrators are staffing up significantly to cover those areas of expertise too.
Right. Yeah, we had the interview with Makerside, who really also explained that they are bringing the sustainability as a fourth dimension. So it doesn't feel like a revolution. It just is, like you're saying, your requirements template. It's additional requirements. It's additional things to consider, and if you get the time to act on those requirements, I think you can change the business.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think in some of the academics that we've talked to have reflected this too, that the core tenets of product lifecycle management really don't change, nor do the structures. But yes, sustainability is a new dimension of value, and some of the, I think, data and capabilities that append on that enterprise PLM approach emphasize supply chain data to include material and component data, like carbon footprint, water usage, reach and rose compliance, percent recycled material, things like that upstream. And then the second is we're noticing a bunch of simulations that are becoming important. And I use the word simulation somewhat loosely. We work with a priori. They do manufacturability simulation, and as a, I don't want to say byproduct, but as an additional output of doing a model-based cost estimate, you get a fairly accurate estimate of what the additional footprint is that's added during the manufacturing process that can depend on what you get from your material and component databases to add up more towards your cradle to gate estimate. And then maker site, or I would say life cycle analysis in general, in PLM speak, and talking with the accounts in Europe, a good way for a PLMer to understand what an LCA is. It's really it's a BOM-based simulation for environmental impact. So the better bill of material, the data you have, the more you can automate aspects of a life cycle analysis and ultimately an environmental product declaration. And I think commercially, that's one of the objectives of the manufacturers, to be able to do that in an automated way, particular groups that have a lot of different product variants or SKUs in their portfolio, where spending between $35,000 and $65,000 to produce an EPD manually just isn't practical.
Right. And James already hinted to that. We also need to move to a connected enterprise and data-driven if we want to involve suppliers. Did you see trends of that happening in your tour in Europe? Are companies embedding suppliers? And yes, how are they doing this? Through standards, through documents, through...
Well, I think one of the more obvious and simple ones is just doing a higher quality trace of material data to CAD designs and PLM. In the past, typically you would just bring over some of that material data into CAD and then forget about it, because things like coefficient of thermal expansion, those things will never change. But more and more material attributes like carbon intensity, water intensity, items like that, they will change on average in material, and also even more dynamically by suppliers. So that has to be traced and associated in a way where that can be more dynamically synchronized. So I think that's one. But then secondly, as we start thinking about circularity, when parts come back for remanufacturing, you need to understand how many times has that part been reused? How much was it used in its previous life cycle? How much can it still be used? So kind of the indentured serialization, and then bringing in that digital thread of its service history or its operational history back into what the new remanufactured product will be important as well.
I don't know how much you heard about the Catena X, which is originally it was a German automotive initiative, became global. Mm-hmm. And here we really learned that the automotive OEMs, they want to even own the materials, because then if they get their own materials back, at least they know the quality.
Right.
And,
right.
So a circular manufacturing is even also a trend coming there.
It is, and we're bullish also on the asset administrative shell, which is the data underpinnings of Catena X, as well as digital product passports. It appears to be a good standard for interchanging asset data. Some of it recipe data from PLM, but also serialized asset data as well. So we know IDTA and some of the Central European countries are sponsoring a lot of that research, and we're involved with that. And much like OSLC has come together to help with upstream data traceability, we think that asset administrative shell will be equally important for some of the downstream product data as it circulates.
Yeah, I think OSLC, we discuss it a lot also in the federated PLM group, where we have both the traditional PLM and then the systems of an engagement. Is OSLC picking up in your customer base?
It is. It is, yes. I mean, I think it's primarily used upstream with requirements, some of the systems engineering structures and PLM designs today. It can grow from there, but it is picking up. And sustainability is making it more important since it, like we discussed, it adds a fourth dimension of value and requirements, more compliance complexity. So it's becoming much more important to have those traceable controls and verifications of design intent with requirements in particular.
We already talked a few times about the digital product passport. Is PTC doing anything special in that direction about making properties available, templates, or?
Yeah, we are. We acquired ServiceMax, I think January 2023, and one of the big reasons for doing that is ServiceMax has a physical asset system of record, which is being expanded upon. And there's of course, big value for it, but in terms of a market buying trigger, like what's the compelling need for it and why would that be a top priority for a company to invest in? It's largely been financially based as far as understanding your fleets and that serving field service optimization. But with Digital Product Passport, that brings a new value since there will be accountability of material and product return. And that team right now is involved with the Asset Administrative Shell standards team because we think that will be the interchange that will drive that business.
Okay. And James, if we look back to 1.5 years ago, what has changed for you?
Oh, well, let's see. I think this focus on sustainability is driving a lot of this product systems thinking, product service system that Dave mentioned from a design for sustainability perspective. But the interesting thing that did not happen, 10, 15 years ago was that there's a convergence of a need for that kind of thinking and lots of other cross-disciplinary needs within companies that we're working with. So this notion of modularity in platforms that can really support something like circularity is also just being driven by customer demand. So there's an interesting convergence of consumer and business to business demands that are supportive, irrespective of sustainability, of the kinds of digital transformation, data management, cross-functional, cross-disciplinary type of engagement for product development. That's going to be very supportive of what we need for sustainability. So it makes it even easier to drive this notion of sustainability is not a niche. It's not a siloed function. It's not something you do separately after the fact in a vacuum. It's just an evolution of product development. And it's just another thing that hangs off of the digital thread. And I think that's been very, very exciting. And there's the synergy around things that are getting people to pay more attention to what we call getting their digital house in order so that they can have this kind of connected system view of the world where there's not one system that's the single source of truth for everything. But for certain disciplines, there may be. But when you look across those disciplines, that need to collaborate and integrate is stronger than ever. And it's being simultaneously reinforced from so many different perspectives that it's presenting a lot of really exciting opportunities, both for the kinds of offerings that we're developing, as well as, I think, for the ultimate impact that, for one of the things I care most about, sustainability, to actually come to fruition now and be less lip service and more whether it's being driven by legislation or by customer demands, that convergence is pretty powerful.
I think in that context that you mentioned, the digital thread, I think that's also one of the beautiful terms that is pushing us to think in a connected manner, not anymore as a silo of a PLM system for engineering and we have a service or an ERP system. And the digital thread is really pushing companies also to think connected along the whole life cycle of the product. I mean, that's one of my observations that in the beginning it was a little bit a marketing term. Now people really start to understand it's about data and it has to flow.
Yeah, and to the point you made earlier too, it doesn't matter whether you're an OEM that's just assembling or you're somebody that is vertically integrated doing soup to nuts, the design and manufacturing of a product. They all have similar needs. And back to the point of levers, without that systems view, you don't know what levers you have to pull. So for the big OEMs, a lot of it's going to be supply chain, and for others, it's going to be more in their manufacturing, but they all have a similar need. And that is something too that I think is more, there's a unique convergence again there too across, types of products, size of industry, verticals. We're seeing the trends repeat themselves over and over again. And to some extent, it's, about carbon and about legislation, but it's also just about operating in a more constrained world, like with increased demands and people wanting to be more unique. So you're getting this convergence of increased constraints with hyper individualism that's, spreading just beyond the Americas now to everywhere. And so the variability and the uniqueness that needs to be managed is well beyond anyone's capability to do manually. So you're seeing the same kinds of needs happen in different size companies that I don't think, again, was certainly not the case 10 years ago, and even 2 years ago was not the case. But that consistency is, and the speed with which we've gotten there in terms of the pain points is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and the span of disciplines needed to make a good decision. Like with sustainability, a design engineer needs to know a little bit about material science, a little bit about supply chain, a little bit about life cycle analysis and environmental science. And how do you do that in a way where you can't have 12 experts in a room making every little decision? And how's the digital thread able to provide actionable intelligence to, lack of a better term, generalist, where the design engineer needs to make some generalist decisions all day, every day, data that's coming from the other systems.
I mean, that's also one of the challenges. Do you need to have a very broad horizontal knowledge of all the different skills, or do you need a way to be able to connect and to find the expert data when relevant? Right. And I think with AI now, this is getting even more easy than before.
Yeah, it's more and more needed because the decisions are getting more sophisticated, and the data is getting better, which is good. I think CSRD is driving a huge amount of more and more precise supply chain data, and that will be very informative for design decisions.
Okay. Meanwhile, I see time is flying while we're talking, and so much to discuss. Maybe the final topic, James, you started also about it, modularity. I think it's one of those hidden capabilities that bring you to a more sustainable product life cycle. Dave, did you notice anything of trends to modularity in your visit with talking with companies?
We probably spent a third of our time in our workshops talking about modularity.
So it's not hidden anymore.
Not hidden at all. Like everybody understands the only way that you're ever going to meet a net zero target is with circularity. Mm-hmm. And the only way you're not going to go broke with circularity is with modular design, because that's the only way that your parts will have value in either as spare parts or remanufactured parts in new equipment. So that's why there's a fantastic interest in it. And part of it is just the design of modularity so that you can offer more variability with fewer parts. But the other aspect is, how do you remove the variability complexity for the frontline workers? Because as soon as you introduce configured order or modularity, every asset that a frontline worker sees come down an assembly line, an inspection bay, a service event, or a disassembly event is going to be a little bit different than the product that they saw before that. The good news is PLM has the recipes to decode that for the frontline worker, and the configuration specific instructions all the way through the value chain is an important byproduct of that modular design that has to be considered to make sure that the whole circularity program is profitable. So we spent a ton of time on that topic as well.
Okay. So to conclude, James, Dave, anything we forgot to mention today?
And a quick answer to that is, I'm sure there is. This is such a fast-moving field. I think we covered the highlights of what the tour covered, but there are so many different areas to dive into. But I think that industry has a lot of good ways to profitably reduce footprint right now. And next time we talk, we'll discover 12, 14 other great ways to do it, since industry's thinking about this hard, and the expertise is evolving quickly.
Yeah, I think that is also my conclusion. When we were 1.5 years ago, we were exploring what is happening. Everyone was talking about it, but now we see things happening in 1.5, and it's moving fast. So thank you for your feedback and your insights. And I look forward maybe in 1 year, because we are going faster and faster. And success with the sustainability journey together. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time.
Bye-bye.
Great to chat.